My drunk sister had called CPS on me. She convinced herself she was doing this to protect her niece and nephew. The voicemail came while I was sitting in my neurologist's office, preparing for an EEG sleep study after having 3 seizures in a single month, the first I'd experienced in 10 years. My hands were already shaking from exhaustion and medical anxiety when I heard the cold, professional voice on the recording. "This is Child Protective Services. I'll be coming to your home tomorrow to interview you and your 3-year-old daughter regarding allegations that have been made." My blood turned to ice. Someone had reported us to CPS. Someone had looked at my family, my husband, myself, and our 3 children, and decided we were unfit parents who needed to be investigated by the state. I never imagined that someone would turn out to be my own sister. My sister Judy and I had always been incredibly close. Every Christmas Eve for the past 8 years, she'd sleep over at our house with her fiancé Will, and we'd transform into Santa's helpers together. We'd spend hours assembling toys, setting up elaborate Christmas morning displays, and sneaking around the house like co-conspirators in the magic of childhood. It was one of my favorite traditions, a night filled with laughter, wine, and the joy of creating wonder for our kids. Judy was more than my sister. She was my closest friend, my confidant, the person I trusted most in the world besides my husband. This particular Christmas Eve had started like all the others. Judy and Will arrived in the early evening, arms full of wine and holiday spirit. The house was already buzzing with excitement, my 13-year-old son bouncing between teenage coolness and childhood anticipation, my 3-year-old daughter practically vibrating with Christmas magic, and my middle child helping me put finishing touches on our elaborate Christmas dinner. But teenagers, even on Christmas Eve, can be challenging. Our 13-year-old son had been going through a particularly difficult phase. Like most teenagers, he'd developed an impressive repertoire of behaviors designed to test every boundary we'd ever set. He'd ignore direct requests, pretend not to understand simple instructions, and punctuate most conversations with dramatic door-slamming exits to his room. His teachers had noticed the attitude at school too, so we knew this wasn't just typical family dynamics. It was something we needed to address consistently at home. Our discipline style had evolved into a balanced approach, firm boundaries with lots of communication. When conflicts arose and he inevitably stormed upstairs, my husband would give him 10 minutes to cool down, then go have a heartfelt conversation about whatever had triggered the outburst. It usually worked well. Till Christmas Eve. The trouble started when my son, in a moment of teenage rebellion and perhaps a desire to seem sophisticated in front of Judy and Will, announced to his 3-year-old sister that Santa wasn't real. The effect was immediate and devastating. Our little girl's face crumpled, her eyes filling with tears as the magic of Christmas morning threatened to evaporate before our eyes. Both my husband and I reacted instantly. "That's not okay," we told him firmly. "You don't get to ruin Christmas for your sister." What followed was our usual pattern, but amplified by holiday stress and an audience. My son argued back, his voice getting louder and more defiant. The situation escalated quickly, voices raised, frustration mounting on all sides. Finally, true to form, he stormed upstairs and slammed his bedroom door so hard the family photos on the hallway wall rattled. Judy and Will said nothing during the entire exchange. They continued helping with Christmas preparations, acting as if nothing unusual had happened. I remember feeling grateful for their discretion, assuming they understood that parenting teenagers sometimes gets messy, especially during stressful times. After 10 minutes, my husband went upstairs for their usual talk. 20 minutes later, they both came down, my son looking appropriately sheepish, my husband looking relieved. Our son apologized to his sister, gave her an extra big hug, and the rest of Christmas Eve proceeded without incident. Or so I thought. December had been a nightmare month for our family, and not just because of typical teenage drama. After a decade of seizure-free living, my epilepsy had returned with a vengeance. 3 seizures in 4 weeks had left me exhausted, terrified, and facing the reality that I couldn't drive for 6 months, which meant I couldn't work, couldn't maintain the independence I'd fought so hard to achieve. The seizures themselves were frightening enough, but the aftermath was almost worse. Constant medical appointments, medication adjustments, sleep studies, and the ever-present fear that another seizure could strike at any moment. My family was already under tremendous stress, trying to reorganize our entire lives around my new limitations. So when that CPS voicemail came while I was sitting in the neurologist's waiting room, already drained from invasive testing and worried about my uncertain future, it felt like the universe was playing some kind of cosmic joke. I couldn't even return the call myself. My hands were shaking too badly, and my voice kept breaking every time I tried to speak. I had to text my husband the social worker's number and beg him to handle it because I literally couldn't function. The next day, while I was still recovering from an exhausting EEG sleep study, a CPS worker arrived at our door. The CPS worker was professional but thorough, and as she explained the allegations that had been made against us, I felt like I was living in some alternate reality. Accusation 1. My husband was an alcoholic with serious anger management issues. I stared at her in complete bewilderment. My husband, who coaches our kids' sports teams, who reads bedtime stories every night, who had never once in our 15-year marriage raised his voice in anger, this man was being accused of being a dangerous drunk. It was Christmas Eve, I explained to the CPS worker, my voice tight with controlled frustration. We had family over. Everyone was having wine or eggnog with dinner. It was a celebration, not a bender. What I didn't tell her immediately was that the only person who'd had too much to drink that night was Judy herself. While the rest of us shared a bottle of wine over dinner and nursed single glasses of eggnog afterward, Judy had methodically worked her way through an entire 18-pack of beer by herself. I'd been worried about her actually, but chalked it up to holiday stress. Accusation 2, we were starving our children and had no food in our house. This one was so absurd that the CPS worker actually started laughing when she toured our kitchen. Our pantry was packed with groceries, canned goods, pasta, snacks, baking supplies. Our refrigerator was stuffed with Christmas leftovers and fresh produce. Our chest freezer in the garage contained enough meal-prepped family dinners to feed us for months. There's enough food here to feed everyone in this house for 3 months, the CPS worker said, shaking her head in amazement. This is definitely not a case of neglect or food insecurity. Despite the obviously false nature of the accusations, the CPS worker still had to complete her investigation. She interviewed our 3-year-old daughter, who cheerfully told her about Christmas morning, her favorite toys, and how Daddy makes the best pancakes. She talked to our 13-year-old son, both at school and at home. His response broke my heart and made me proud at the same time. He told her he loved his parents, that things at home were fine, and that when we disciplined him, he understood it was because we loved him and wanted him to learn and grow. He explained that sometimes we took away electronics for a week or grounded him when he misbehaved, but that he knew we were fair and that he felt safe and cared for at home. When the CPS worker was packing up to leave after her thorough investigation, she paused at our front door. I want you to know, she said, I'm grateful to be handling a case in a functional home with happy, healthy kids. Usually it's quite the opposite. 2 days later, she called to officially close the case. Our risk assessment score was low. She saw no evidence of abuse or neglect, and no further action would be taken. But the damage was already done. In the days following the CPS worker's visit, I started putting pieces together. Judy's behavior had been strange since Christmas Eve. First overly communicative, demanding I call her immediately and tell her how the CPS interview went, blowing up my phone with questions and concern. Then, after I told her everything went fine, complete radio silence. I talked to my parents and my brother, and they'd all noticed Judy's odd behavior when they'd spoken to her. She hadn't outright admitted to making the report, but her responses to their questions had been tellingly evasive. She seemed really defensive when I asked if she knew what was going on, my mom told me. And she kept saying things like someone needed to speak up and children's safety comes first. It didn't sound like someone who was just concerned about you getting a random CPS visit. My brother was more direct. I'm 90% sure it was Judy. She's been acting weird, and frankly, she's been drinking way too much lately. I think she convinced herself she was doing the right thing while she was drunk and angry. The more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Judy had been the only person outside our immediate family who witnessed the Christmas Eve incident with our son. She'd been drinking heavily that night, more heavily than I'd realized. And her pattern of communication afterward seemed designed to gather information about the investigation rather than offer genuine support. But I still couldn't quite believe it. This was my sister, my closest friend, the person who'd helped me set up Christmas magic for my kids just days earlier. How could she have betrayed us so completely? For weeks, I wrestled with whether and how to confront Judy. My brother suggested we arrange a lunch meeting, thinking a face-to-face conversation would be more productive than texting. But honestly, I wasn't sure I could look her in the eye without breaking down. Whether from rage or heartbreak, I couldn't tell. I was still trying to figure out my approach when Judy reached out to me with a text. I love you so much. I hope you know that. Something about the timing and tone of that message made my stomach clench. It felt like a preemptive strike, like she was trying to soften me up before I could ask the question we both knew was coming. I replied, I have a question to ask and I need you to be completely honest with me. My phone rang within 30 seconds. I think you already know the answer if you're asking this question, Judy said without preamble. So yes, it was me. The words hit me like a physical blow. Even though I'd suspected, even though all the evidence pointed to her, hearing her admit it out loud sent chills down my spine. She said it so matter-of-factly, almost proudly, like she'd done something heroic instead of potentially devastating. Do you realize what could have happened to my kids? I asked, my voice shaking. To me and my husband? Do you realize how bad the outcome of this could have been? That's when she exploded. Judy launched into a screaming rant that was so vicious and incoherent that I could barely follow it. She yelled that my husband and I didn't deserve to be parents, that I obviously didn't care about my children because I hadn't brought them up in our conversation, despite the fact that my very first question had been about what could have happened to them. I kept trying to interrupt, to respond to her accusations, to ask her to explain where she'd gotten the idea that we were starving our children or that my husband was an alcoholic. But she wouldn't let me get a word in. Every time I said, "Can I please speak?" she'd just yell louder. The only thing that seemed to penetrate her rant was when I finally said, "You realize we're going to be taking a very long break from you, right?" "I'm sure you will," she snarled back, "and I don't care." Then she resumed her incoherent screaming about how she cared more about my kids than anyone else, apparently by putting them at risk of being removed from their home and ensuring they'd lose their aunt as a result of her actions. I tried one more time to break through to her. "If you're not going to let me speak, I'm going to hang up." But she was beyond reason, ranting about things that made no sense, her words slurring together in a way that made me think she was either drunk again or having some kind of mental health crisis. "I'm hanging up now," I said calmly, and I did. Then I blocked her number immediately. I called my father right away, my hands shaking as I dialed. "She admitted it," I told him. "Judy called CPS on us, and she just spent 20 minutes screaming at me about how we don't deserve to be parents." I heard Dad's sharp intake of breath, then silence. When he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. "I was really hoping it wasn't her," he said quietly. "I didn't want to believe my own daughter would do something like this." I told him about Judy's behavior on the phone, the slurred speech, the incoherent ranting, the complete inability to have a rational conversation. "She sounded either drunk or like she was having some kind of manic episode," I said. "Maybe both. I think you should call her just to make sure she's okay. But I'm done. I can't have someone in my life who would put my children at risk like this." Dad agreed to reach out to Judy, though I could tell his heart was breaking. None of us had wanted to believe she was capable of this level of betrayal. Sitting in my kitchen afterward, I tried to process what had just happened. In the span of one phone call, I had lost my sister, not to death or distance, but to her own destructive choices and what appeared to be serious substance abuse and mental health issues. The signs had been there for months, if I was honest. The excessive drinking at family gatherings. The emotional outbursts that seemed to come out of nowhere. The increasingly erratic behavior that everyone had been tiptoeing around, hoping it would get better on its own. Thanksgiving, Judy had consumed an entire 18-pack of beer and then started crying at the dinner table for no apparent reason. When family members tried to talk to her about her drinking, she'd lash out defensively. We'd all been walking on eggshells around her, not wanting to trigger another scene. But I'd never imagined she'd cross this line. I'd never thought she'd be willing to risk my children's safety and our family's stability because she'd convinced herself in some alcohol-fueled delusion that we were unfit parents. The accusations she'd made were particularly telling when I thought about them in the context of her own behavior. She'd accused my husband of being an angry drunk, while she was the one consuming enormous amounts of alcohol and flying into unprovoked rages. She'd accused us of starving our children, after eating dinner at our table where she'd never once left hungry. It was projection of the worst kind, and it had put my entire family at risk. The CPS investigation was closed, but the damage extended far beyond that one traumatic week. My 13-year-old son had been pulled out of class and questioned about his home life. My 3-year-old daughter had been interviewed by a stranger asking whether mommy and daddy were mean to her. The stress had exacerbated my seizure disorder at a time when I was already struggling to manage my health. But perhaps worst of all, Judy's actions had torn our family apart. My parents were devastated. My brother was furious. Extended family members who heard about what happened were choosing sides, and the unity we'd always prided ourselves on was crumbling. Judy had always been impulsive, but this wasn't just poor judgment, it was a deliberate act that could have resulted in my children being placed in foster care. The CPS worker had warned us that if another report was filed, it would trigger a full investigation rather than just an inquiry, and the stakes would be much higher. I couldn't trust Judy around my children anymore. I couldn't trust her not to retaliate when she realized I was serious about cutting contact. I couldn't trust her not to make another false report if she decided she was angry with us about something else. Going no contact with a sibling you've been close to your entire life isn't a decision you make lightly. Judy and I had shared a room growing up. She'd been my maid of honor, and I'd been hers when she got engaged. She was supposed to be Aunt Judy forever, the fun aunt who helped with Christmas magic and birthday parties and family traditions. But the person who had screamed at me on the phone, who had accused me of not deserving my children, who had put my family through hell because of her own unaddressed problems, that wasn't the sister I'd grown up with. That was someone I didn't recognize, someone who had become dangerous to the people I loved most. I blocked her on all social media. I changed my phone number and made sure she couldn't contact me through mutual friends or family members. I removed her as an emergency contact from my children's schools and made sure they understood she was not authorized to pick up my kids under any circumstances. Most heartbreaking of all, I had to explain to my children why Aunt Judy wouldn't be coming to birthday parties anymore, why she wouldn't be sleeping over on Christmas Eve, why she was suddenly absent from our lives. My 13-year-old, mature beyond his years after his experience with CPS, understood immediately. "She called them on us, didn't she?" he asked. When I confirmed it, he just nodded sadly. "I'm sorry, Mom. I know you loved her." My 3-year-old was harder to explain things to. She kept asking when Aunt Judy was coming over, when they were going to build puzzles together again. I told her that sometimes grown-ups make bad choices that hurt people they love, and that Aunt Judy had made some choices that meant she couldn't visit us anymore. The months that followed were difficult but necessary. I focused on my health, working with my neurologist to get my seizures under control and adjusting to the reality of my new limitations. My husband and I worked together to create new routines that accounted for my inability to drive, and our family grew closer in many ways as we navigated these challenges together. We established new Christmas traditions that didn't involve Judy. We found other family members and friends who could fill some of the gaps her absence had created. It wasn't the same, it couldn't be, but it was safer, and that had to be our priority. The CPS workers' warning about future reports haunted me. If Judy decided to retaliate for being cut off, if her drinking and mental health issues worsened, if she convinced herself once again that she was protecting my children by trying to have them removed from our home, we could face another investigation, and the consequences could be much more severe. I documented everything: the phone call where she admitted to making the false report, her erratic behavior, the timeline of events. I kept records of the closed CPS case and CPS workers' positive assessment of our family. I prepared for the possibility that Judy might try to cause more trouble, because I'd learned that addiction and mental illness can drive people to unimaginable lengths. My children's safety had to come first, no matter how much it hurt to lose my sister.